Okay, here I want to spend a few moments talking about the article Navigating Interracial Borders. As we talked about an idea of Voices from the Movement, that there is an issue about being bi or multiracial. We haven't come to accept it effectively in our society. And it is in the interracial relationships that we start, that the idea of race often becomes more apparent to everybody in the society. She says in 1967, the final anti-miscegenation laws were overturned, and those were those laws, like I mentioned in the last video, that prevented whites from marrying non-whites. But even at the ending of those laws, she's saying that these racial borders still exist for most Americans. I often tell my students, especially the non-black students, that if you want to find out who's racist in your family, bring home a black person, tell them you're going to get married. You find out in a couple of weeks who's racist and who isn't racist in your family. Generally, that's what you'll see. And that's because these racial borders and this value that we placed on difference is still a part. This kind of slave consciousness is still a part of who we are. So if these racial borders exist, she's asking then where does, for her, in her case, where does the black-white interracial couple exist? Again, she goes back into these kind of three choices as enforcing existing borders, ignoring borders, or dismantling borders. And it's this idea that is in this interracial relationship that she starts to understand how then race affects our society. And she uses the term a miner's canary, and this is important. She says the miner's canary is that how the interracial relationships can reveal problems of race that otherwise remain hidden. Like the canary used in mines that would make the miners aware of poisonous gas that you wouldn't be able to detect through your sense of smell, that were invisible to you. Interracial relationships reveal these kind of problems with race that often remain hidden. I mean, she talks about the idea of her sister not letting her daughter date a black man, but it was okay for her sister to marry a black man. Used the not right for her excuse. So again, we start to see then how racism is no longer 24/7, this kind of aware, overt racism that we talked about with your model, but it's more contextual. A person may not say or do may think things racist, but they may not act upon those thoughts until race confronts them into a certain context. So here her sister she never thought it had a problem with race until race became personal. It was going to affect her child. Then race became an issue and her racism started to come out. The interracial relationship is able to do that. Being able to see the problems of race that still exist in our society today, that often remain hidden if we look at them from a monoracial perspective. She goes on and talks about a number of different things. And what I found what was interesting to me is how she describes then the reaction by her white family and his black family. And how in the white family, most of the objections to the relationship mask in non-racial terms. So we go back to the idea of new rhetoric of racism. It's about the children. It's about the problems marriage is hard enough, why make it even harder? These type of things, so to talk about it without bringing in the issue of race. It uses pride of your family and of your race as a way to convince you that being involved in an interracial relationship is wrong. They use the opposition by society, how society is against these things. And we know that society is more accepting, but we also know just a few months ago that a judge in Mississippi refused to marry a white woman and a black man, not because he was racist, this was what he said, but he didn't want their children to have to go through what interracial, biracial children go through. So we see this process, and we see how this type of white family said that, again, the key thing to me is this kind of new rhetoric of racism. Most whites will object to it, not because they're racist, but give any other reasons for their objection other than race. While on the other hand, she says the black families were very much involved in race. That it was clearly you don't want to marry a white person. There was an importance of marrying black. This idea of cultural survival, cultural purity, maintaining cultural boundaries. So there was this importance of marrying black. Moving to the negative meanings of interracial. That again, the interracial child being able to gain acceptance into the black family is going to be very difficult. You have to deal with white racism. And I like this thing, it's this idea that it's okay to date whites but not marry whites. Because once you marry whites, you have to bring the enemy, the person that's most associated with the oppression of blacks, into the home. You can't keep them out. So it's like bringing the enemy into the home. And I thought that was really interesting. And how they view whites as the enemy because of the issue of racism. And then the idea that if none of this matters, then you're betraying your race. And this happened to me. I mean, when I was in grad school, I had a lot of discussions with, a lot of contact with other Latinos, very much a leader in that Latino community. Then I started dating a white woman and moved in with her. At that point, many of my Latino friends quit calling me. I was told by someone that they felt I had sold out to whiteness, that they were so proud that I was reclaiming my Chicano heritage, and this just proved to them that I was a sellout, and they weren't going to deal with me because I sold out my culture, I sold out my race. So these kind of ideas that it isn't just whites calling other whites who marry non-whites betraying their race. It is non-whites telling other non-whites who marry whites that they are also betraying their race. And the last thing that I want to talk about is this kind of idea that I've had about interracial relationships, and I'm still trying to figure it out, still trying to come to terms with it. But I believe that we don't have very many interracial relationships in our society. We have what I call a lot of mixed race relationships, but not very many interracial relationships. To me, interracial relationships would be this interconnection on all levels, that you are interconnected with one another. And for me, in an interracial relationship, when there is a white person marrying another white person, for that relationship to move from being a mixed race to an interracial relationship, I argue the white person has to learn about the lived experience and the histories of the non-white partner and the way the non-white partner has been forced to learn about the experiences and histories of the white partner. Let me say that again. In terms of a white and non-white interracial relationship, a mixed race relationship exists, or it is a mixed race relationship, until the white partner takes time to learn about the experience and histories of the non-white partner and the way the non-white partner has been forced to learn about the experiences and histories of the white partner. When that occurs, when the white partner has learned about the experience and histories of the non-white partner, then I think the couple of the relationship moves from mixed race to interracial relationships. Now, when it comes to non-whites marrying other non-whites, blacks marrying Latinos, Latinos marrying Asians, the power dynamics seem to change, because what I think happens in the first one, and let me get back to the white and non-white thing. The reason why I think it's a mixed race relationship is because of historical dominance. Since we are the sum of our history, we are the culmination of the histories that we are part of, then there's a historical dominance in that relationships. a knowledge of white history that far exceeds the knowledge of the non-white history. That type of historical dominance is what I think maintains a mixed race relationship. Now, to get back to this idea of, say, black and Latinos, or Latinos and Asians, Asians and Native Americans, the power dynamics, the historical dominance seems to change because probably neither one of them knows the experience and histories of the others. So because we're not taught these histories and we don't explore these experiences in school. So we don't know that, so neither partner knows the histories and experiences of the other partner. Generally, that's what I seem to see. Well, I still think in that moment it's still mixed race. The historical dominance seems to favor the dominant racial group, the dominant non-white racial group. So the Asian will probably know more about the black than the black knows about the Asian, since we spend more time on black history and experience than we do on Asian history or experience. But I still believe that in order for that to be moved from a mixed race to an interracial relationship, both parties have to learn about each other's histories and experiences. In that moment, you move from mixed race to interracial relationships. A question that was brought up that I hadn't considered in a class a couple of quarters ago, what if it's a monoracial individual marrying a biracial individual? How does that affect it? And I thought about it, and I'm like, no, it still has to happen. Because biracial individuals, like we talked about, have a long history of oppression, have a long history of seen as an atrocity or as an example of race trading or race mixing, where anti-miscegenation laws were in place. So I think it still comes down to that idea that the monoracial individual needs to learn about the experience and histories of the multi or biracial individual. And that's this last quarter, the last question that was raised to me, what if the multiracial or the person of color or the monoracial individual, the person of color, they don't know their histories? And I'm still trying to come to terms with this thing, but I still think it plays within historical dominance. And that for it to move to an interracial relationship in the way I envision interracial relationships, it would mean that the non-white person take the time to learn about his or her histories outside of their relationship to their family, to come to a better understanding. But because they already know about the experience, they know what it's like to be treated as a black person or as a Latino, Asian, Native American in this country. They understand that thing, so they understand it from an experiential perspective, but may not understand it from a historical perspective. I still think that the dominant, or say if it's a white, or the dominant racial group in the relationship, still needs to learn about the less dominant or the non-white partner. So again, to summarize what I've been trying to say throughout this whole presentation, is the idea that we have this miner's canary, that it is this interracial relationships can reveal problems of race that otherwise remain hidden. How the different races react then to interracial relationships talks about their locations of their understanding of race. And the idea that I argue that we have a lot of mixed race relationships, not a lot of interracial relationships in our society. Thank you for listening.